which is Ian Sweeney, who's the Manager of Community Development at the CLC. Shh. Ian's been at the CLC for 10 years. Before that, he was working in Alice in communities and town camps. That was since 2003. His background's in youth work and casework, and he's always had a development approach. And I kind of hark back to the comments that were made by Kevin Smith this morning about community development requiring a whole of client approach with an interdisciplinary client team, and later talked about concentric and radiating communities of practice. And I think what Ian is going to show us is the extent to which at the CLC in their community development program that's happening, and could be a good model for some of the other organisations to think about. So over to you, Ian.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Mary. That microphone sounds okay. Thanks. Look, I just wanted to start by acknowledging that I'm on Yagara and Turrbal country today, and I've come from Aranda country where I'm lucky enough to live and work. My second acknowledgement is to Julie and Nick for bringing us along. It's, as development practitioners, we struggle to find a natural home. And in this group, in CNTA, we find a lot of like-minded people and a lot of people that we feel that have sort of deep thinking and understanding of a lot of the issues that we look to. So so thanks very much for all of your efforts to bring us here. So I'm going to talk about the community development work that Central Land Council has been doing since 2005. And obviously it's been developed to fit that context of that CLC has, and recognising that all of us here work in different contexts. I just hope that there's some things that I'm going to talk about today that will resonate with you, and you can find some usefulness in. So the unit started in 2005, and the basis of our work is all in this community development framework that you might have picked a copy up. And the framework was developed in the early days of the unit because there wasn't a handbook on how to do development work with groups that already had money in Central Australia. And so the early years of the program spent a lot of time asking those questions about how do we best do this work, how do we define the work, and regularly testing those ideas to make sure that the work was valued by the people that it was being delivered for. So the opening quote is really just defining what the unit is trying to achieve, and I think it came out of a bit of an era where it felt like every organisation suddenly had a community development worker in it too. So we wanted to be clear about what we were doing and what we weren't doing. So the framework, it outlines what the unit's goal is and what the objectives are. And so this framework was developed in conjunction with constituents, was put through the Central Land Council executive as well, which endorsed it, and also gave this new work some legitimacy with the groups that we were working for. So I could summarise up the objectives really as being that first objective is all about the governance, which we've talked about quite a lot over the last couple of days. And we think governance is a key part of the work of building groups' capacities, building skills within groups, that the aim is that those skills are then transferable to all those other boards of organisations in community that those groups sit in. The second objective is about the projects, the outcomes that the groups do. So, a huge range of projects, which I'll talk about a bit later, in more detail later on, but they're outcomes that are valued by the people that are doing the work. And the third objective is about building that evidence base, again with a new type of work that hasn't been tested. The people that were involved in the program in the early days really understood the importance of generating this evidence base, and I think not only just for the program to learn on and reflect and improve its practice, but also to argue the case for more resources and argue the case for government and others that this was a more legitimate way of working than that top-down bureaucratic approach, especially in terms of delivering the outcomes for the people that the program's aimed for. It's a much more effective way of working. And then the fourth objective is what I'm doing here today. It's telling the story of the program and the work that we do. And we're fortunate enough now, having been going for 15, 16 years, that we have a bigger story to tell than we did initially. So it's we're really fortunate to be able to be in this position. Just a bit of a snapshot of the region and the work. Many of you know these regions. We've divided ourselves, with an anthropological lens, so that we're working with the same groups, the same language, the same families as well. So we have that northwest Tanami region, which is where the Granites Gold Mine is located, which is the biggest income stream that the unit works with. The Walpri Education and Training Trust program is funded out of that gold mine, as well as the Granites Mine Affected Area Aboriginal Corporation. And so they make up the bulk of the money that comes through the unit. I think WET is $3 to $4 million a year. GMAC is at the moment, it's upwards of $9 million a year. And then we have the southwest. The major income stream there is Uluru-Katajuda National Park and that income. And also a bit of lease money, Section 19 lease money, which we've talked about a little bit before as a driver there as well. And that eastern region, which is most of the income there is mining exploration. Again, that Section 19 lease money and some pastoral money as well. And those regions also, there's a bit of a native title Aura split as well, where you've got a lot of Aura land in the Tanami and a lot more native title land in the east and southwest. So the money builds up. We're now looking at over $130 million since 2005, and for that remote community economy, it's been a significant injection of money that's been invested in those communities. And I should point out, 19 staff. So when I started in 2011, there was 7 of us, and we've been growing, steadily. And I'll talk a bit about some of those growing pains later too. So this slide was produced to tell the story really to our constituents. Some of the feedback we got through some of our monitoring was that we needed to come up with better visual ways of communicating what community development was and what it wasn't. And that's what this slide talks about. So we're just defining that lasting community benefit. I guess of particular interest is probably the definition of community, and community really varies from a small traditional owner group, might be 40 or 50 people, to a large community like Larger Manu, where we'll have non-resident traditional owners, we'll have resident traditional owners, a lot of different family groups, and obviously a lot more complexity in the politics too. So the definition of community impacts the work quite dramatically. And in terms of the benefits, I think it's straightforward stuff that we all deal with. And we always encourage groups, I think, to be generous in their application of this, to look after the most vulnerable in community and to do projects that, benefit as many people as possible. And from that same era, we developed this process. We call it our planning river. It was developed with a couple of TOs from Indaria. And it just maps out the steps of the process. And so it's a tool that I think we use in most meetings. How things go. You might not meet with a group for 6 to 12 months, and you can come back and pick up where we're at, to remind people, all right, last time we were at stage 3, and now we've done this and we're at stage 4. So it's an important tool in mapping the process and the journey that people are on. And I'll go into more detail about these stages, but just to touch on it, when we first start working with a group, we're setting up a governance arrangement with that group, normally a smaller committee or working group, somewhere between 6 and 18 people. We're agreeing on a process with the group about what power that group will have, that working group will have, and what their what decisions they can and can't make. And often there'll be, in the early stages, a report back to the TO group for a final sign-off. And then normally, once groups have been working with us for a period of time, they'll be more comfortable in the processes and normally delegate more responsibilities to that working group, which also makes the processes more efficient. The groups then choose a project and a project partner. So the key part of our process is that Land Council very rarely would deliver a project unless it's might be something with the Ranger Works or an anthropology project. Really 98% of projects are done by a separate project partner. So normally community controlled organisations, Aboriginal construction companies get quite a bit of work. And so this part of work is where Land Council goes and builds the the detail on some of those projects, how to best deliver it, quotes with different groups. We might flesh out some more of the detail about what people want to have delivered, and then bring that back to the group for a decision. And then once that group's made the decision, the legal department kick in, and there's a funding agreement that's entered into on behalf of that group with the project partner to keep them to account. And so that's got all your payment schedules and all of the additional criteria. Once the project's happened, it's the last step is a reflection on it. What worked well, what didn't work well, what we could improve, which all gets fed into our annual monitoring, but also into the learnings for this group before we jump back into the normally step number 3 of working on the next project. So the governance arrangement's obviously quite a key part of the work. Talking about those different examples before, with a smaller TO group, that can be a very quick process of people nominating, who their working group's going to be. In a community like Largemanu, it might be quite a lengthy process. It might take a day, it might take a couple of days. It's always important to be flexible. Give groups the choice of consensus or secret ballot if the group can't come to consensus, or even a combination of both. And that's a bit of Largemanu secret ballot down the bottom there. So we talked about the planning and funding decisions before. Obviously the planning is key for projects, and really trying to get to the outcome that people want to achieve is one of the most crucial things. I think sometimes groups can have a tendency to jump towards an output, building a thing, rather than what people are actually trying to achieve. And so the best way to achieve your objectives, it's really important to get into some of that deeper planning. And then the types of projects. There's been some of these community development newses around, which probably tell the story as best as anybody can. They're an in-house newsletter that we put out for constituents to give people the ideas of the sorts of things that they can do with their money. So we touched a bit on monitoring and evaluation before. So we started our monitoring and evaluation in 2010. We've had a long-term relationship with Linda Kelly and now more recently La Trobe. The monitoring initially was a lot about, is this the real deal, what we're doing? Do people actually value what we're doing? Are we getting it right? We tweaked our practice with a lot of the feedback that we got from people in those reports. We're very lucky to have Petronella, who does a lot of our independent work on going and talking to people and collecting monitoring interviews anonymously, where people can give us their give us their candid feedback. And that's matched up with our own project reports from project partners and our staff reflections. So we've had a really skint M&E budget for the best part of 10 years. It often sits around 30 grand. Just this last year, we've finally got a really gutsy M&E budget, which means we can employ specialists to start driving that. We can finally start a longitudinal case study, which is something, if we could have, we would have done 10 years ago to measure the impact of well-being of the program. And we can, I think we can put more effort into getting people in community to be more involved in the design of the program and collecting the data as well. So it's always good to reduce complex work into a table of numbers, and this is just a snapshot of what last year is, just to give a bit of a sense of the program and the work. This was a year obviously heavily impacted by COVID. We had best part of 4 months where we couldn't go out bush with the biosecurity regions that were created, but they've managed to create a huge amount of work. And one of the other bits of data that we're collecting more and more of is the local employment, is the impact of local employment on communities. So communities are always really strong on wanting genuine local employment for people in that TO group or in that community. And we've become better at tracking that information. So we can tell this story about that impact that the work is having. And so we're getting, obviously, again, in that remote community economy context, it's a significant contributor. Huge variety of jobs. So most of the work comes out of the WET program, employing youth workers, learning centre staff, also a fair bit in construction as well. So the major challenges of the work, and I think most of these have become, the more the program gets a reputation and the more money that goes through a program, I think it's put a magnifying impact on all of these areas. So a common one, and it's always been with the program, is groups funding what I think most of us in this room would argue are government responsibilities, whether it's putting better equipment in clinics, the premise of the Walpurgis Education Training Trust to invest in education and bilingual education, return to country trips, are all things that you should argue that the government could be providing. So we do have some success with leveraging income from the government to support this, but it's it's still a considerable issue. Our advice to groups, often people will come up with a project that you'll think is something that should be funded by government, and normally the response we get when we say, look, we could go and lobby for that. Telecommunications is a recent one, just mobile coverage in a community, and people will say, look, we've been waiting forever for that to happen. If we pay for it ourselves, we can, this can happen. This can happen now. Cost shifting, particularly with the local government. Our local government model came from Queensland, and I've heard a fair few people talk about just the issues you have with local government here, and we've adopted that into the NT. And there's a lot of we have a lot of concerns about local government moving money around when TO's identified to fund something simple as a sports ground, a playground, that sort of thing. The other part is the project partner capacity. Particularly with the big money, people lean very heavily on community organisations. And whilst the strong community organisations have a great chance of resource and to grow and expand their work, it can put significant growing pains on organisations as well. And so the program, really we're only as good as the project, the project and program delivery. So it's part of the work that is complex and is hard to find solutions for. Sustaining the impact. So again, with the big money groups are building large pieces of infrastructure or wanting to build large pieces of infrastructure. Swimming pools, water parks, the Learning Centre program through WET. But then there's an ongoing issue of how can you maintain that, the operational costs. So being able to have that future income that can go towards maintaining that asset or running that program is requires a lot of planning. The inequity across the group. So just back to that that slide of the CLC region talking about that money coming out of the Tanami. So you do have a lot of benefit in that area, and then in that east, the Sandover and Plenty, where people have got really minimal income. So we've just successfully this last financial year got some money from NIAA to match people's contributions. So we can match groups up to 150,000 targeted at those areas in the east and the southwest, so they can start to do more significant projects. And even for some communities, Canteen Creek, Fink, that have that different township tenure, so they don't get that Section 19, they can get some money to be involved in the program. And finally, the organisational impact of the work. That I mentioned that the unit's grown from 7 to 19 in 10 years, but that added on work in the legal department, anthropology, the finance department, the fleet. It has a really big whole of organisation impact, and I think as an organisation we haven't always kept up the support to the unit that we could have. So I think we're doing some good work on that now, but there's a significant period of catch up. So that's me. Thanks very much. Hopefully I've got enough time for a couple of questions.